more than two of you, but two very special that I know of. And there's three books that I'm actually going to refer to. The first one
Talk into the microphone.
is by one of my favorite people on the planet, except she gives me such a hard time. My dad used to say, if you want to know what a real cowgirl looks like, here she is. Pat. I consider Pat the historian of Chimayo. She wrote this book. She's been a speaker here at the Rancho de Chimayo many times and took us on a docent tour once to the high road to Taos. So she really knows Chimayo. I love her to death, even though she calls me all kinds of names. She calls me Maria Montage Skolnick because I'm always making all those collages, so she calls me Montage Skolnick. Anyhow, she wrote this beautiful book. I think this is my grandmother. Actually, one of these people here is my grandmother. But she's a lovely person. And the one thing that I'd like for you to know about her, if you can hear me, right?
Not when you turn your head.
Okay, I'll keep straight ahead.
Yes.
Okay, Jack, I'll look at you.
Yeah.
Is her husband, Marco Oviedo. What you should know about her amazing husband, who is not with us, but as Pat says, he's always with us. His spirit is with us here. He was also a speaker at one of our Voces events. He's the amazing sculptor, bronze sculptor, who did the sculptures you see outside the restaurant. The big gigantic grasshopper, the St. Francis, the angel, and they have a beautiful gallery just up the road. You should visit sometime. But both Pat and Marco are very dear to my heart. The other book I want to mention is my new buddy, Jean Penn Lafarge, who wrote Turn Left at the Sleeping Dog. And I've heard it been told many times that if you want to know Santa Fe, you have to have this book. And what you should know about Penn, first, let me start with your dad. Your dad was Oliver Lafarge. Many of you probably know the Lafarge Library. You see it right there on Washington Street, across the street from the Anastasia restaurant. And I think other...
No, the Lafarge Library's on this, is on next to the high school on Llano Street.
Oh, on Llano Street. But isn't Lafarge is no longer that?
No,
the old library is no longer called Lafarge?
That was never called Lafarge. That's
Oh.
just the main library.
The main library, okay. Well, a lot of people know the Lafarge name, partly because of his dad. I'll tell you about his dad. I just read this last week, so let's see if I remember. His dad moved to Santa Fe in 1933, graduated from Harvard. He was a novelist and an anthropologist, came to work in New Mexico with the Native American people. He won the Pulitzer Prize for Laughing Boy. And he came with his first wife and their two children. And the first wife didn't like it here in Santa Fe, from what I understand. And so she left. He remained, and he married a Cita Baca from Peña Blanca. Was she a Baca or Cita
Just Baca.
Just Baca. And my grandma, my dad's mother, is a Baca from Peña Blanca. So you turn over enough rocks, you figure out how you're related. So I'd be honored to be related to you,
Thank
Ken.
you. Thank you.
And anything you would like to say about your book? Because he's got the most amazing voice. Wait, come up here. Wait, I need to have him tell you. Oh, and one of the reasons he's here is because I found out that he knew John, our guest speaker. And I thought he has to be here for John, so.
Yes, I was invited to be here because John Sherman and I have been friends for many years, although I have not seen him in many years also. About my book, I'm not supposed to be up here talking to you. John is supposed to be up here talking to you. So I'll just say that Turn Left at the Sleeping Dog I knew that people who had been here for 50 years would love it. What surprised me and continues to surprise me is that people who have been here for 50 days love it. And last thing I'll tell you is that I'm told it's a very good Christmas present.
I'm sorry, what?
Did you write the next book?
No.
There's another book just like yours. It's
Like over the mountain or over the
Behind the mountains?
behind the mountain.
no
Faces of Santa Fe.
Oh no, that's not mine.
That might be Anna Pacheco.
Ana Pacheco.
She's another great
Well, the third book this third book is really the segue to Harry introducing John. This book was put together when I was in high school by Mrs. Dinkle. If those of you, did you have Mrs. Dinkle for Spanish at Santa Fe High School? Go Demons! Mrs. Dinkle, as many of us knew her as her students in high school, was her name was Reynalda Ortiz Pino. She was where's Judy? Oh, Judy, her daughter, and her granddaughter, Anne Renee. Reynalda was our 1938 Fiesta Queen, and probably one of the most beautiful Fiesta Queens we ever had.
Yeah.
And she was involved in the Folklorico Association, which meant that she was very much involved in preserving our traditions and heritage. And they had a contest asking students to write essays, and whoever won, they got published in this book, and I happen to be one of the winners. I'm in this book. and the reason this is a segue to introducing John is because John is here indirectly because of Reynalda Ortiz Pino, because he knew her, and he became friends with her daughter, Reynalda's daughter, Judy, and John wanted to be able to come and speak to a big group, and it all came together this way for us to get together. So Reynalda is here in spirit with us too. So I'm going to have Harry now introduce John.
Okay. Okay. I will read from extemporaneously here from my written notes.
Mouth and mouth.
Okay. John Sherman, now a resident of Indianapolis, which is a little northeast of here, lived in Santa Fe from 1977 to 1985, when he had the opportunity to meet and interview many intriguing northern New Mexico people known to most of us. They were artists, writers, socialites, and politicians. During his time in Santa Fe, John taught English and journalism at St. Catherine Indian School, wrote a weekly humor column, generally Sherman, for the Santa Fe Reporter, wrote feature stories on New Mexico history for Journal North, was the editor of Apalacio, the magazine of the Museum of New Mexico, and wrote articles for many other publications in New Mexico and elsewhere. In 1983, John researched and wrote Santa Fe, a pictorial history, with 350 images, earning him the New Mexico Governor's Award for Historic Preservation. The second edition was issued in 1996. In his 1990 book, Taos, a pictorial history, came later. His books have become prized collectibles. John?
Thank you so much. I'll try to manage my notes, which I need, even though I can speak pretty much about this stuff without looking, but I want to make sure I don't go over too long and do so and so forth. But most importantly, too, to make sure that you can hear me. So I told more than one person, I said, I'm glad to be home, even though we lived here 8 years. Thank you. Santa Fe especially and New Mexico in general, and also Taos, of course, having done the book there. And I was up there on Thursday and spoke to a nice sized group at the Taos, Sharp site, which if you haven't been lately, is just growing and growing and growing. And wonderfully, I had the opportunity to see again Virginia Kaus Levitt, the granddaughter of the artist, who I corresponded with by email and mail for a long time before we finally met. And she's a dear person. I think she's 92, something like that now, and she lives there. And the staff is wonderful. It's just an awesome place to be. So I feel a bit intimidated speaking in front of this group because you know so much more about New Mexico history than I do, and lived it and grew up in it and so forth, and for generations. But that hasn't stopped me, so I did it anyway. But, we came here in 1977. We were living in Washington, D.C., both working for the federal government, 2 small children, not quite 2, not quite 4. And, you know, when you get a federal government job, especially in D.C., you just don't quit. You work until retirement, right? Well, that didn't sound very interesting. We both wanted to become writers. So we got up, we lived overseas. My wife had been in the Foreign Service in Africa, and we traveled and been in Peace Corps and so forth. So we said, okay, well, let's move. So we were going to sell our house and move and raise the kids somewhere else. And we got out a map of the U.S., decided, well, we're not going to go overseas again unless, can you hear me okay? Okay, good. Unless we were under government supervision, so to speak, because that's what we had before, and we didn't want to go off on a run. We were quite that adventuresome, whether it be Africa or Europe or whatever. So we got off the map and we decided right away that Alaska was too cold and Hawaii was too far away, so that reduced us to the 48. Then we started saying, okay, well this is too redneck, this is too hot, this is too cold, this is too whatever. And by default, we ended up in New Mexico. And we knew, of course, Albuquerque was the capital, but we didn't know anything else about the state, right? So we started, it's a little scary that 4 years later I'm writing a book of the history of Santa Fe. So we started reading, and first of all, we found out that no, it wasn't the capital. And that we knew the Ashton to begin the Santa Fe, you know, the song, and we knew the Santa Fe Trail and all that sort of stuff. But we really didn't know much else. I did not know that there was an artist colony in Santa Fe or in Taos. So we were just that naive. So we had a few months before we sold the house and moved. So we were reading like crazy to find out, you know, what this place was all about. And while we certainly didn't learn everything, we learned a great deal more. So when we arrived, at least we knew when we were driving into Santa Fe that it was the capital, among other things. And we knew the names of some of the artists. We knew about the, you know, all kinds of different details that some of which I later put into the book, and some of those articles that I wrote for Journal North. I was producing quite a few of those later on. And so we got here, and but before we left, before I quit Peace Corps Washington headquarters, this fellow popped his head into the door and he said, "You're quitting the government." I said, "Yeah." He was rather surprised. And he said, "I hear you're moving to Santa Fe." "Yes." "Well, you must have really liked it there." And I said, "Well, we've never been there." And he looked a little surprised. He said, "Well, your friends there must have really talked it up." And I said, "We don't know anybody there." He said, "Well, how'd you get jobs?" And I said, "We don't have any jobs." He said, "Far out." So we get in a brand new station wagon that had a stick shift that didn't really work all that well, but anyway, we'll discover later. And we headed east. We went to see the Chincoteague, the horses there on the coast first. People said, you realize you're to go west, right? We said, "Yeah, we understand." So we had learned by that time. So we circle around and we head west, and we eventually end up here. Well, I remember pulling into the state and seeing this mountain in the distance. We said, "Well, we'll stop there for lunch." And we weren't used to the clear skies, and we stopped there for dinner. So it took us a while. To come to terms with that. And also, when we first arrived, why were we so tired? And no one had warned us. We knew the altitude, the elevation. So we learned, you know, chapstick and lotion and lots of water and walk slowly. So we later tell our visitors, do all those things. And this time I'm a little tired sometimes, but it's okay. You know, even though I'm here somewhat infrequently. I've been back since '85, 4 or 5 times. Last year I came back, but that was not for a pleasant experience. One of my dear friends, some of you may have known her, Peggy Van Holstein, had lived in Santa Fe, and for many years and was a writer. And so I came back first to work with her near the end of her life. She had had Parkinson's for many years and then passed away soon after that. And then I came back to lead the memorial service at the temple in Santa Fe in June. So it wasn't exactly a time to go around and visit people and stuff like that. So this time it's very pleasant to have a chance to go. We did go to Zozobra last night. We were in Taos, and Curtis is with me and has not been to the Southwest at all. So we're going to go up to Los Alamos and Bandelier as well. And we came back the high road the other evening and went up the other way and went out to the gorge and so on. So, well, I was teaching at St. Kate's in English class. I introduced the journalism program there, and they said you have a phone call, which is very unusual. So I went over. It was in the high school building. I know the campus now is just in really terrible state, but it was that time it was thriving and going, and we had grades 7 through 12. I taught at one time everybody from all 19 Pueblos and Navajos and Apaches and some other kids, Spanish kids and a few Anglo kids and so on. And so it's quite an interesting mixture, and most of those were boarders at the school. And so I took the call, and this publisher that I never heard of, Donning, from Virginia, said, we'd like you to co-author a book with Nancy Applegate about the history of Santa Fe, pictorial history. And it's like, as a writer, this was like, pinch yourself. I mean, is this really happening? You're getting a call that you would dream of. So I said, of course. I mean, I love Santa Fe. I love photography. I love history. I love all these kinds of things. I love research. So it was all of these things coming together into one thing. And but they were getting impatient. They wanted to get the book done. So Nancy and I met together and we talked about it and working, collaborating on the book. And eventually she pulled out the project. She owned the Viagra bookshop that was in Santa Plaza. And so I agreed with the publisher, yes, of course, I'll do the book myself, and started in April of 1982. And we called that the year of the book because I was very busy. I was teaching full-time at St. Kate's, 2 little kids, all kinds of other writing I was trying to do and so on. And but I delivered the manuscript in December of that year, and I was restricted to 350 photos, non-negotiable. I couldn't use more than that. So out of that 350, 347, maybe 348 of those had never been published before. I was determined not to use photos as much as possible that have not been published. These are both from public and private collections, the same way with the Taos book. And I wanted to have I got tired of opening a book and, there's that picture again of so-and-so, or there's this place and so on. So even though it was similar, I was determined to use a different photo. So the first person I consulted with was Dr. Myra Ellen Jenkins, who was retired by that time. I've been the New Mexico State historian. We attended Holy Faith Episcopal, and my wife and I were in the choir. Now, she could sing. Why I was in the choir to this day remains a mystery, and should be in a mystery book of Santa Fe. A scary thought. Anyway, but our kids would sit with Myra Ellen while we were up in the choir. So I knew her, and I'd interviewed her for something. And so I said, I want to do a family chart. That's one of the things I want to put in, going back to the first Spanish settlers coming into the area. And she recommended the Ortiz y Pinos. And so she put me in touch with Mela Ortiz y Pino de Martin, and Bob Martin. And so I called her up, and I got the expected question. She said, do you speak Spanish? And I said, no. So, but she didn't, that was okay. I mean, she didn't pause. She just said, well, go to the palace before we meet. Go to the palace, and there's a big display on our family. So go and look at that. And I thought that made very good sense. So I went there, took lots of notes, looked at the drawings and the images and so on, photos and stuff. And so I was prepared with that when I went to her house. So I sat down, and she was very sweet. Bob was very nice, and he had taken so many photos. I asked him one time, he said, is it a dumb question to ask you if you've taken thousands of photos of La Conquistadora? And he said, yeah, that's a dumb question. Yeah, indeed. Of that alone, he had done it. And many times I see on the Voces Facebook page, someone has posted a photo, and they it's a Bob Martin photo from the 40s or something. So I'm looking at some photos that she has, and one of them is her father. And I said, well, I don't use so many pictures even of the family, so I said, I don't think I'll probably use this one. And I wouldn't even remember that, except that evening, get a call from someone I had not met yet, Concha Ortiz y Pino de Cleven, who let me know in uncertain terms that their father's picture was going to be in the book. I got Concha, and she was not nice. She was not happy. And so, yes, guess whose picture is in the book? Yes, their father's picture. But we became very good friends. And she was reading my General Sherman column regularly. I found this out when I wrote something about one of the governors, something disparaging, what a shock, in that column. And she loved it. She called me up. She said, "Oh, John, that was so funny." She just loved that entirely. So she was very dear, and was a great help too in terms of this. But since she and Mela both had no children, I need to sort of shift over a little bit and keep the family chart, but come down further into the generations. So that's when I got to know the first cousin, Ronaldo. And my, what a dear, sweet person. Judy and I were just chatting about her a minute ago, and I miss many of these people. I miss her very, very much. She had such a sweet smile. She was so dear, and I just had pleasant hours meeting with her and talking with her, and she was helping with the family information and stuff like this, and we talked about many other things. And Maria said, we know her as Mrs. Dingle, as someone who taught at Santa Fe High, and of course I knew her many years later, but she was always very welcoming and was very helpful. So she put me in touch with Judy, and it was Judith Brito at the time, and so we have her in the chart, and then we have, I think I'll ask everybody here, her daughter, Anne, is here. Is there anyone else who's actually photographed us in the Santa Fe book? I don't think so. Is there anyone else here? I know Penn's father's photos in the book. And Judy is mentioned in the book, as in the chart and so forth, as one of the donors. But when I saw their names on the list, I thought, oh, somebody who's actually in the book is here, yeah. So, and then we had, 12 generations at that time of the family, from the going back to the family that came in the 1600s, and coming on down. Of course, you had to keep it cropped, too directly. You had to leave out all the siblings and all the other things and so forth, but bringing down the way. And there are a few question marks, of course, because of the era. They didn't know when someone was born or when somebody died or when somebody was married, but they knew it happened. So there's a few question marks in there, as you would expect. But I started making a family chart I typed on teletype roll. I started doing that when I was writing poetry, because when I had to change those 8.5 by 11 sheets, I would lose a stanza or a line. So I decided, get teletype rolls, and you can just keep typing, go back later and correct them and so forth. So that's how the Santa Fe book got written, was on a typewriter, and it was on teletype rolls. But I took a long piece of that, and I started creating, not the chart exactly that went into the book, but extended beyond that. It went on and on and on. And so I took it over and I showed it to Mel, and she said, "Oh, I want to copy that." So I made a whole copy of that for her, that's somewhere, I suppose, today. And in my papers at home, and I have many papers that I'll be giving to the Historical Society or the Museum of Mexico, whatever, and the same with the Taos things that I have to go through, even put in my will to, so my children will know they're welcome to have copies of stuff and they remember these things, but to make sure that those papers, many of those notes come here for people to use for research, because of what went in there. Was so much more than what didn't go in there, so much more than what actually did. I was restricted, I said, to 350 photos. And so as I got near the end of the research, I hadn't started writing yet because I had to choose the photos first. So I had the photos, and it's in chronological order. So I laid them out on the living room floor. The photos, I said, these have to go in the book. So I laid them down in these different piles coming up to the present day at that time. And I counted them, and I had 950. I cried. I was horrified. I had to pull out 600 photocopies of these photos. 600. They were like my babies. One at a time. Had to pull them out and get down to the 350. And somebody said so cavalierly, "Why didn't you just publish another book?" It's like, well, why don't you just pay for it? Of course, yes, right. But I still have those photocopies of those. And I would have some notes on them and stuff like this, and I have maybe the Museum of Mexico number and some other information and so forth, plus handwritten notes and so on from there. So one of the comment about Concha, and I think we used this photo of her at the book signing party, took place in '83 at the bank. she comes up to me and she has her book. Once we signed, she said, "I want you to write, Concha, I love your big nose." And I said, "I will not do that." I thought, first of all, I wouldn't do that. But second of all, somebody see that out of context, they're going to go, "What a rude person. Why did you say that?" Right? Anyway, so I wrote something much more bland in there and stuff like that. We had a good laugh about it. But she was there, and Ronaldo was there, and Molly was there, and Sanchez, all kinds of people. So there was one photo, and Judy, you may have, I don't know who has this photo now, but there was a photo of one of your relatives. It was taken in Las Vegas, New Mexico, and your mother had a photo of it, 8x10 black and white photo, someone in an open casket. And it was like what you think of as an art photo, but it wasn't posed in that sense. But the women were in black and the men were in black, and it was an extraordinary photo. And I said, "Oh, could I use this?" I mean, you kind of stretched it. There's family connected, even though it wasn't in Santa Fe County. And she said no, and she was probably right not to put something like that in. But it was just an extraordinary picture all by itself. Well, the chart has expanded now because Judith is now not only, by the second edition in '96, Judith was a grandmother, not just a mother, and then now she's soon to be a great-grandmother. So we're adding the generations in that same chart coming directly down. So that's one. I spent many hours. I rode my bicycle down. I rode my bicycle. We lived on Mesa Verde Street on West Alameda. Rode my bike to St. Case every day, and they gave me permission to chain it up at Rosario Chapel. There was like a conduit pipe, and I would chain it there and walk through the fence and go to the campus and teach and so forth, and then ride it home. And the rule I came up with was if it was below 19 degrees, then my wife would drop me off at a station wagon, would throw the bike in the back, and my briefcase at the time with papers, and then of course it was warmer later, so I could always ride it home. Well, I would ride from there down to the Museum of New Mexico photo archives, and Arthur Olivas and Dick Rudisol were very helpful, and were very conversant with what was there, tens and tens of thousands of photos. So as I began researching, I began narrowing what I was asking for. So I tell them I wanted a folder on a certain person, a certain era, a certain organization, certain whatever, and that they would bring them over and I would go through. I looked at thousands and thousands of those pictures that I got down to what I thought was 300, but it was 950. So got them down. And of course there were many private photos from private collections in there as well. So they were very, very helpful. And but at first, I was learning this whole drive to make Santa Fe look like Santa Fe. And Carlos Vieira had said the mundane look, of 10,000 American towns, and how bland it was, and they were determined to make Santa Fe look Santa Fe. And we later saw the building in San Diego that was built for the exhibition there, which the Fine Arts Museum is almost a twin to. And when you see it, you go like, oh my God, it looks so similar. The Art Museum opened in 17, and this was in 1914, I think, 14, 15, something like that. So it was just not much older than that. So, but at first I'd have to say, what is this building? And I remember one of them was the previous governor's residence, which had the big white columns, the colonnade, or what you call it, or the portico around. And I said, what is this? Because by that time I learned that some of those buildings were still here, but they have been, like the State Capitol Dome was gone, and that sort of thing. Well, this one I have a photo in the book of it actually exploding in midair because they blew it up and tore it down after they built the current governor's residence. So then I learned, and then I began to be able to place things because, okay, this is where this building is or was, and that means this building is over this direction. Either it was still there, or it was like the federal courthouse was half finished for decades and stuff like that. So it went on, things like that. So we began to learn to place these different things. Then the whole transition of St. Michael's College and all of that area, how that changed. And now so many of those buildings, they lost their mansard roof and they got a flat roof, and on, how it became that way. And then the drive to preserve then what was left and to make sure that it was as they wanted to look. So using the Spanish Pueblo style or the Santa Fe style and go with that direction, whether it was originally that way or it was built that way, or like we're staying down the Rios Road, you drive by a modern hotel and it has vigas, okay, that they extend from the outer wall, okay, maybe it's the inside, but unlikely. Anyway, but at least it has the look, but it's not quite the same. I happen to live in a mission-style house in Indianapolis that looks like more like the Alamo, that kind of mission style. So I thought I meant stickly furniture and so forth. That mission movement is a no. So, but it's not exactly the same thing. But anyway, and I do remember talking with one woman who stood in the lobby of the government building she was working in near the former state capitol building before the roundhouse, and how they were tearing the dome down that she had grown up with. She was sobbing, just sobbing in the doorway watching this take place. And then I go inside the building and you see, I hope it's still there, some of the features of the original building at least were preserved, some of the woodwork and this kind of thing. Then you go up the stairs and you can see the underside of the dome, at least you could at that time. But of course the dome is gone and it's a flat roof and it's all adobe and fixed up. Handling all those photos, and I'm really a klutz, I was really terrified that I was going to just bring great damage to something. Well, David Lord had lent me some photos from his family, things that he had. And one of the pictures was on this heavy cardboard kind of paper, white paper, and colorized. This was the style at a certain time around the turn of the century maybe. And so I got it out of the car to return to him downtown, and this wind came along and cracked it. And I thought, oh no. I mean, it was one of a kind. And it was like, oh my God. So I go in, I'm probably in tears again, go into him, and I say, I'll pay for the, I don't know. He said, John, it's okay. He said, I fix things like that. It's okay. I mean, actually, that's a skill of mine is to do that. And it's okay. He calmed me down. So, but I'm glad to say in Santa Fe and in Taos, that's the only time anything came close to being destroyed or damaged or anything else. I was so careful. Much of the time I would have photocopies that I could work with and so forth like that. Then when I wanted the photos, either I had them already developed and hadn't printed them out yet, had the old contact sheets because it was all black and white film, or I would have them to lend to me. I think it was Gladys Gilmore. I went to visit her. She was living alone, and she had a painting of her as a young girl in her dining room. Her father had arranged with one of the artists, I can't remember who it was now, one of the early artists, to paint his daughter in return for lodging or food or money or all the above. And I thought, oh, I would have her pose beside it. And then I thought, no, she's old, she's feeble, she lives alone. I don't want to publish the fact that this painting is here in her home. Now I wish I'd taken the photo at least, but I wanted to protect her and not to do something like that. One of the other photographers I met with was Lisa Law, who is not a Santa Fe person, but she lived here, and I was told that she had, I kept being passed around from people, that she had photos from the Santa Fe Film Festival. So I called her up and she said, yes, she did. And I chose one of Lillian Gish, where she's got her arms extended and talks about her. She had many different choices. And then in walks her house guest, the poet Allen Ginsberg. Chen told me he was staying there, and his lover. And I'd seen them at Indiana University a few years before. And I go like, oh my God, because Ginsberg was instantly recognizable. And she said, oh, this is Allen Ginsberg. It's like, yeah, that's right, it is right. And but one of the stories that she told was not quite so funny. She had been at the film festival, one of the film festivals, and Ginger Rogers had been there. And she saw her on the street. She was standing under the street, I think it was by the Hilton, with a series of matching luggages going down in size like this. And you can just see this photo, can't you? She raised her camera up and she put it down because her father had been not necessarily blacklisted. He was in the film industry. And she remembered that Ginger Rogers had testified as a friendly witness on Capitol Hill. And I named names. I looked this up and couldn't find evidence of that, but she was definitely a friendly witness. Her father may not have, he wasn't an actor, but he was involved, and they knew all these blacklisted people. So she said, to hell with that. So she did not take that photo and have it used. So, anyway. Well, occasionally I'll be told by someone, now, I'll tell you, but don't print this. And I've been told a couple of times, and I told Maria this, that I have been told that Governor Seligman's son was in the state pen, and I checked his dates. He went into office in 31, so at Christmas, in 31 and 32, I believe he died in office in 33, they would bring the son from the state pen to the governor's residence. That would have been the one with the pillars, and for Christmas dinner with the family. Spend a few hours and they'd take him back again. Well, a couple of other people had already told me this story. The person telling me said, no, don't print this. Well, I didn't have the presence of mind to say, well, I already knew the story, because I thought, well, she might not believe me anyway. And if I printed it, she might think I betrayed her confidence. So I had to be careful about things like that and make sure I didn't do that. The one artist that was left was the earlier Taos and Santa Fe artist was Fremont Ellis. And I asked some people of his era, early years up, said, is he still around? Because he wasn't in the phone book. And they said, I don't know. I haven't seen him for years. I'm not sure he's still alive. Well, at that time, we had things called phone books. Remember those? Then you could call up, and the operator would have two categories of unpublished numbers. One was unpublished, but they were allowed to give it out. The person had given permission, but they paid extra to have it out of the book, especially someone like Fremont Ellis who had been bothered by any number of people. Or it was the category where they couldn't tell you. I think they would just say, I don't know. They wouldn't say, we have it and won't tell you, but I think the police would be able to get a hold of something. So he had an unpublished number that was available. So I called him up. I was relieved to find out that he was still around. Called him up, had a nice chat with him, and arranged to meet him the next day. He lived on Kenyon Road in a big home designed by William Penhallow Henderson. Went over there and discovered almost immediately that he had no idea who I was. He did not have a short-term memory, but he could talk in great detail about 1919 when he arrived, in the early years, the secret inventories and stuff, which he, of course, was the last one. And so his companion, Frances Dunn, was living in a little casita right on the property, and I got a chance to meet her. I met Bambi, and then later, Tom McCarthy was a filmmaker, passed away a few years ago. He and I filmed Fremont Ellis, interviewed him. I think it was out at the ranch, and we interviewed, I'm going to talk in a minute about Connie Brasher Mendenhall, interviewed her. She was a hoot. If you knew her, she was hysterical. And so we have those on video, and we'll make sure those copies are available too. And doing that, so he could talk in all this detail. And he told the story of, well, he lived different places, but he claimed El Paso was his home. So he was in New York with his mother. She went into the Metropolitan Museum of Art. He thought, I don't care. So he stayed outside with the chauffeur. Finally, he got tired of waiting for her, so he walked inside, and he saw this Albert Bierstadt. Now, I don't think Bierstadt was anything small. He had this gigantic painting of, somewhere in the West with the mountains here and the lake and the sunlight and everything else. And Fremont Ellis was absolutely captivated by how did he get this to look like sunlight was hitting it. He couldn't figure it out. Well, obviously he did figure it out. And he had some talent there, or he wouldn't just go and start painting. But that got him to become a painter. So Albert Bierstadt is responsible for that happening, because he was just, and every time I see Bierstadt, I'm not a great fan of Bierstadt, but every time I see it, I think about Mr. Ellis, Fremont Ellis. So he came here in 1919, walked around the hills, of course Santa Fe, very small, came back, and he was just overcome. He was so excited. And he ran into Abe Spielberg. And Abe Spielberg said, oh, you came too late. 1919. You came too late. Now, the first Spielberg had come in 1846 with the Army. And many Spielbergs, since then. And Abe said, oh, well, when we came in 77, people said, no, you came too late. Now, when we came in 77, there was Zook's drugstore, and I can't remember the other one, but there was a drugstore on the plaza, there was a soda fountain, drugstore just down the street, just off the plaza. The next year, gone. One became an art gallery thing, the other became Haagen-Dazs, something like that. Gone. So we were at the end of that era too. And of course, meeting Mr. Ellis, sadly went to his funeral at Cathedral in 1985, just before we left. And it was almost empty because he had outlived everybody. He'd gone to all those funerals, I'm sure, of all the artists, in Santa Fe, maybe in Taos, but they were all gone. So I was interviewed by the New Mexican at the time, and I said, because they knew I'd worked on this, and I said, you know, I absolutely loved his work and everything, and so they did a nice little piece about him. So people found out that he had been around, and I told people in the meantime that he had been, and so it was wonderful to meet him. So I call it the came too late syndrome, because people came in '85 when we were leaving, we said, you came too late. you missed this and missed that. Well, now, of course, it's changed. Radio, right? So last night was I had not been to Zozopa for 40 years, and most people there weren't even 40, right? So, but first year, we did go to Zozopa. We said, after they moaning and stuff like this, and they set him on fire, we said, this is sick. This is really sick. And then we got addicted. Well, the last year we went, which was in '84, we were burning. And this young couple beside us, they were said the same words. Well, this is really sick. And we had to walk away. We were laughing so hard. It's like, knowing that to this day, if they're still going, if they never came back, whatever happened, I don't know. But that was so funny. At one point, I had this, what I call a private giggle after I hung up. I was talking to this man on the phone, getting dates about his family, and I asked him his birth date, and the date that he got married, and he was providing all me. And then I said, and what's the birth year of your first child? And I up one. I thought, well, that's weird. So I said it to someone, and they said, well, it's because there wasn't 9 months between the marriage date and the birth date. And he was afraid I was going to publish that. Well, I wouldn't have done so, but publish that. And I didn't have a chance, I didn't call him back. I thought, no, let it go, right? So anyway, but I was kind of thrown at first. Another person that I wrote to, and I have her response in the Taos book. I've been told that Claire Booth Luce, she wasn't loose yet. She passed the broke all time before the loose type. That she had ridden on horseback into La Honda, and I didn't go and check and to see if there were any doorways, because it's been redone somewhat. If there are any doorways that you could be on horseback and ride inside. Then when I was doing the Taos book, they said she rode on horseback into Don Fernando, which burned down in '33. And so I thought, okay, I've got to find out. So I wrote her a letter, and she answered me. And so I'll read you the last sentence that she wrote, after she denied both of those happening. And she didn't even think she'd been in New Mexico anyway. She said, it is simply one of the myths that people cherish about the actions of well-known figures in the days of yore. A little highfalutin sounding, but that's what she said. But when I was looking up some information on her for this talk, I found out that she was rather free with her words. She claimed to have given the phrase the New Deal to FDR. She claimed to give blood, sweat, and tears to Churchill. She seriously claimed both of these, and many other things. And I thought, well, did she do it or did she not? She may not have even remembered, but who knows, right? I mean, she was not a good source to ask this, right? And she would have maybe lied one way or the other, whatever. But it was kind of fun. But I mentioned Connie Consuelo Berger Mendenhall earlier, and she was such a hoot. And she talked about escaping from the Loretto Academy more than once, running away, and they'd have to catch her and bring her, get her back, and her family would be, whatever, distraught. Her mother's first husband was Mr. Otero. They were the parents of Adelina Otero Warren, who became quite well known nationally for many things, writing and politics and so on. And then she married Mr. Berger. They had a number of children, a number of girls, and I don't remember where she was in the sequence there, but 4 or 5 daughters. And quite well-to-do family. And she talked about Best & Company. You may remember the name. It was a department store that was mostly on the East Coast. I remember seeing a faded Best & Company in Chevy Chase, Maryland. And those stores were very, very high up, Bealtman, Bloomingdale's, all this kind of stuff, and so forth. And so they would lie on white paper on the floor in the Berger home, and they would draw around their bodies and write their name on it and mail this off to Best & Company, and they make them dresses and ship them back. Now, this couldn't have been a cheap exercise for this, so they get these dresses. They also had a chandelier that lowered. They would put garlands of flowers all over it and pull it back up for parties and stuff at the Berger home. So all these kinds of things. But she was such fun to talk to. She was almost blind. So the photo that has appeared, someone brought the copy of the later edition of the Santa Fe book the photo that I have in the first edition of the woman walking down West San Francisco Street has a hat on, a long skirt. It's like 1920, something like that. And Molly Sanchez says, I think that's a Bergère, but I'm not sure who it is. And
the poster you wrote?
I'm sorry.
Did you bring the poster?
Yes, yeah, it's in that too. Yeah. You can turn and pull them out now. So Molly couldn't tell for sure, and Connie couldn't see well enough to identify if it was or not, and we never could find out. Now, a few years ago, there was an article in the New Mexican about that very photo, and somebody wrote in and said, "Oh, that's my grandmother," stuff like this, and I kind of doubt it. I wasn't sure. Didn't say. No one mentioned Bergère anyway. So we're sitting there at her table one night, and she has this. We used to have these, the ashtrays, the cigarettes in the little round thing, and the lighter all matched, right, on your coffee table. Well, she had the cigarettes. I was an ex-smoker, but she said, "Do you want a cigarette?" I said, "Oh, sure." So I had a cigarette. I said, "You want one?" She said, "No, I just smoke Camels." So she was in her 90s with this time, right? Anyway, it obviously didn't hurt her. Anyway, she and Hansel Pfluger of the shoe store people. His parents were German immigrants, this is the photo here that's on this poster. Yeah, but never could find out. It was not identified. No one could ever provide. Maybe someday someone hopefully will be able to identify her. And but I just thought the photo was just wonderful with the car and with the skirt and everything else. And
San Francisco Street.
yeah, San Francisco Street, right? Yeah. So she and Hansel Pfluger were in the same high school class. There were this picture of everybody but one in the book, and that person was probably taking the photo. There were 8 or 9 graduates that year, and so I interviewed them in 1985 for their 75th anniversary, since they were 1910 graduates. Connie's also in the mural in the St. Francis Auditorium, and I haven't seen it this trip, so I can't remember who she was, but she graduated in 1910. Now the building opened in 17, but they were the Beauregard murals, and Carlos Ferreira, he died, and Carlos Ferreira took over and finished. So I don't know at the time, I may have known then, known her now, if she posed for the first fellow or the second fellow or whatever, but anyway, she's in there, and I was able to identify her at the time that she was one of those people who posed. So like the mural at St. Catherine Indian School, there were a lot of people in there who would say, they were Native American, or they were Anglo, or they were Spanish, whatever. They could point to themselves or someone in their family who's in that mural there. So, and one of the people that I contacted was Amalia Sena Sanchez, who told me the story of the fire across the street. The sanatorium burned in 1896, and she recalled lying on the roof. She was not quite 4 years old, watching it with her siblings, watching it burn. Her family doesn't know if they were up there, but they were. And I'm pinching myself again. It's like she's talking about 1896 with great clarity. Now, unlike Fremont Ellis, she could talk about the present day too, because she was a staunch Republican. And there was a headline in the New Mexican about one of our governors who was a Democrat, who'd done something not unwise, shall we say. She finally said, "John, that's all your fault. I know you're doing it. I know you voted for it." And I had. But I also was appalled by whatever it was. But she was taking no credit for that. That was my fault, right? And so we had great fun. Well, when I first showed up, she said, she was rather abrupt. She said, "I'm only seeing you because you're at St. Catherine's. And my sister was a member of the Sisters of the Blessed Sacrament. She had passed away by that time, but she had served for a while at St. Kate's and then other places around the country where the order was at that time." So she said, "Do you want a drink?" And I said, "Oh, sure." I thought she meant a Coke, but she pointed to a full bar. And I said, "What would you like?" She said, "Bourbon and water." I said, "Well, that's what I like too." So I made us a bourbon and water, gave her one. She said, "Oh, you don't have to make," she said, "There's not a bourbon in here." So I gave us each a good slug of bourbon, and we sat there. It became a running joke with it. So after that, we always said, I made the drinks, I made them as strong as we both liked them. So I was being kind. I thought, well, a little bit, right? She was 90-something, right? Anyway, that's why she lived. Penn spoke movingly at her funeral. She was, if I recall, 2 months shy of 110, and outlived 2 of her 4 children, who came there, I think, not all that well, but and she had been the first Fiesta Queen, 1927. I mentioned in the book that they asked her to do this, and she said, "I'm married and I have children." They said, "Well, so is Queen Victoria, so don't worry about it." So, but then I later interviewed her about that time. She said her husband wanted dinner on the table. He didn't care what she was off to. He wanted his dinner on the table, as always. and she made sure that was taken care of. So we had a great time. And then after the book came out, she agreed for us to have a party. Tom McCarthy, the filmmaker, and I arranged for a party inviting a whole bunch of old timers to come to her home. And it was on her birthday, which is early December. And I cannot remember whether it's Immaculate Conception or the other date, but anyway, early December. So I baked her a birthday cake, and we had that as well. And she asked Anita Gonzalez Thomas to pour. It's old-fashioned things, and so she poured the coffee. And so we had these people. I've never seen that many fur coats in my life. Everybody had a fur. Everybody, including Peach Mayer, or Peaches Mayer, depending on what you call her. She was carried in by her son in her fur and placed in a chair. She sat there, and all the other people were there around. And why we took no pictures, I was a photographer, Tom was a filmmaker. We took no pictures at this party. I'm still hitting myself in the head. Why did we not do this? But we're so consumed with getting things ready. But some of these people hadn't seen each other for years. So it's a great time we had and got together. And I sort of estimated the age of everybody and totaled it. And I put it on the invitation, X number of years. It's well into the hundreds anyway, or into the thousands, something. And I sent one off to Calahey at the New Mexican. And she called me and she said, "Where the hell did you get that number?" She said, "I don't believe that." And that's what she put in the paper. She said, "John Sherman said this, but I don't think that's true anyway." But I think it was pretty close anyway. But she was a rather outspoken person, and so she put that in, but she didn't mention the party and so on. So anyway, we had a great time. Well, Amalia took me to meet with a woman whose name I no longer remember, who was living, she was bedridden at La Villa Rivera. That was the old hospital building. I think it's a hotel now. It was where, I can't remember the intersection now, but it was, sorry? Yeah, the old St. Vincent's, yeah, that became the nursing home, yeah. So this would have been 84, 85, something like that. So we go to visit this woman. She introduced me and said I'd come back and visit her. So we walk up, and all the staff is gathered around the nurse's station. Well, Molly walks up. I don't know this is going to happen. Stomps her cane on the floor, and they look at her, and she said, "If I lived here, you'd all be at work." Once again, I'm laughing and laughing. I mean, it's just so funny. And it was pure Molly. I mean, she was so sweet. But by God, you would be at work. I mean, you knew they would be. Should you made that right? So anyway. And Anita Gonzalez Thomas is another person who provided photos of the Delgado family and her family, and answered lots of questions. When I was editor of El Palacio, I wanted to involve some people like that in the publication, because so much of this was, not to sound too snide, but 12-year-olds who worked at the folk art, and they would write this stuff, and I wanted to have people who knew something about the state and the city. So I had to write a book review about something, and then I got in touch with Willard Clark, and he gave permission for me to use some of his woodcuts. The inside back cover had poems, and I believe we did them in English and Spanish, and we used some of his woodcuts. But she warned me. She said, "Don't use any of his woodcuts where the man is sitting on the ground with sombrero down, he's sleeping." And she considered it very offensive. And I said, "Well, I wouldn't use one of those anyway." I had other ones where they were on a burro or whatever. They were not in a sort of derogatory like position and so forth. So, but she was great fun. Well, again, after the book came out, I got to know another. She was an old timer, but she had been around for some time. Betty Egan, who bought Rancho Encantado, and I did work for her first on her family from Cleveland. Her father had invented something, and I'm sure you've all seen. I didn't know the name of it, called a speed nut. It's kind of like a washer and screw that holds together like a washer and dryer. Originally, they did them. Her father's family made stoves, porcelain plates, and they would crack. And so if the speed nut would like to kind of a spring action to put them on and off, and so it saved them because they would have to provide replacements and so forth. So he came up with that, made millions of dollars. I think her share was only $60 million between her and her siblings. So she was divorced at this time. She had 2 daughters and a son. They drove out. They bought Rancho Encantado. And she laughs about it herself. Now, to know her then, you wouldn't believe this would happen. The 4 of them were going to Safeway, load up this high 4 shopping carts to provide food for the staff and for the guests at Rancho Encantado. After a couple of these times, the manager came over and said, "What the hell's going on? Who are you? Why are you doing this?" And she explained. He said, "Don't buy from me. Buy wholesale. Don't buy from me." So she laughed, because now, of course, once she did that, it's like, why did she had no idea. But she was a wonderful host. She became herself a personality. So people wanted to meet her as much as anything. So she's kind of obliged to go to a wedding reception. I was out there some years later, a bar mitzvah reception. She was there, and I got a chance to see her again. Very tall, as you remember, and had long hair down the back. She was braided. And so I worked with her then on her photos. So she'd open a box of photos. There'd be just a snapshot of her and Princess Grace, and Princess Anne, and this movie star, and that movie star, and this king, and that, because the government in D.C. would arrange for these heads of state to fly into somewhere and come to Rancho and Cantada for a few days to rest up, and all they knew ahead of time, just before, dietary restrictions. Could they eat pork? Did they whatever? They had to know what food to prepare for them, and so then they would come there and they'd rest up, and she would meet them. Sometimes she had photos with them, and then would fly off to D.C. to meet the president, and so on. So they were a regular place for people to come to prepare to go on to D.C. And so she was at a wedding reception one day, and this woman kept tugging on her sleeve. She said, "I want you to meet somebody." And Betty was getting irritated. Finally, she said, "Well, who is it?" She said, "Frank Capra, the movie director." She said, "Oh, hell with the wedding." So she went over and sat down with Frank Capra. She didn't know, obviously, he was staying there. So they sat down, and she was a wonderful admirer of his. And they drank, and had a good time, and told stories and laughed. And it was so much better than that wedding, right? So they probably gone and said, Where'd Betty go? Well, she was off with Frank Capra. So anyway, that's right. And one of the people that I had the pleasure of meeting after this was, I met Dr. Ashley Pond and his wife Lucille in Taos, and knew the story, of course, of the school and everything else closing. And Peggy Pond, and some people just called her Peggy Pond, even though she was in Peggy Pond Church for a very long time, called her Peggy Pond. Just like Peach Mayer. Some people called her Peach, some people called her Peaches. I kind of figured out that, and I don't remember anymore, whichever group it was, were really close friends of hers. The other people just knew who she was. But I don't remember who were Peach and who were Peaches groups of people anyway. But Peggy Pond was the name that, it was sort of a shortening, a nickname obviously. I'm shortening, but having a nickname with her. So I went to see her. We sat on her kitchen table, this time we were drinking tea, I think, and coffee. Having a drink of coffee or tea. And she asked me permission to read one of her poems. Of course I said yes. And then she read it to me, and she seemed just a little bit nervous. And I was so charmed by this, and I thought, this is the kind of situation I was in where I felt so guilty almost that I was there just with her in her kitchen table, at her kitchen table, listening to her read this poem to me. No one else was around. I wasn't taking pictures. I wasn't even writing notes about this. We were just having a pleasant evening. And the same with going back to see Amalia, or to visit Ronaldo, or see Concha again, or some, all these different people, and it was just such a delight, to get to know these people, and so it's just it was just a wonderful experience, and I stopped feeling guilty about it, and I thought, well, I was told anyway, and I couldn't find another book that was exactly like what I had done. There were books about the artists, there were books about certain aspects of Santa Fe, but there wasn't an extensive pictorial history with this many hundreds of images. I was approached for another edition of the book by, I think it was 4 publishers, including the Museum in New Mexico, but I said, well, you're not offering me enough money. And I said, we're not that far apart, just raise the price a couple of bucks. And they wouldn't do it, so it never came out again. I mean, after Bill Gannon brought it out. And I thought, isn't that weird? I mean, come on, we redo the book and add some things, and we can have it out again, and you sell a lot of copies, people who don't have them otherwise. So I'm done. Okay, if you have comments or questions and so forth. I will add one thing that I meant to mention. There was one time that I did not get photos, and this is a story. I won't mention the name because I'm not sure who everybody is here, and I don't want to embarrass anyone. But this fellow had an extensive collection of photos that were originals. I mean, had not been published, and he invited me to come and look at them, and I was just beside myself. I was so excited. Well, his young wife, much younger, kept interfering. and she kept flirting with me, and I was not returning the flirting. I wanted to say, get the hell out, we want to look at the pictures, right? And so he became more and more agitated, and finally he said, I'm going to do this. And so I walked out empty-handed. I never saw any of the pictures. I have no idea to this day what happened to them. And it was like, I mean, lady, I wasn't here to see you. I didn't want, she wouldn't even leave the room, and it just, he was, whether he thought I was flirting back, I can't imagine he did, but I think she just made him so angry. I doubt that was the happiest of marriages. And so, anyway, so there are pictures that might have been in the book that, we don't know what's happened to them. Thank you.
One of the images I've seen of you was with Pete Domenici. What was?
Yes, that was the book signing party. The First National Bank sponsored the first book. By sponsoring, they paid the publisher a certain amount for them, and then they restricted the sales at first to their customers. You could buy 2 books, and then they also had the poster that we showed. That the poster went to the employees at the bank. I think they just gave those away, and so the 2,500 copies signed. Now the bank had no editorial control, and the later edition was Bank of Santa Fe, and they too did not see it. So I wouldn't want to do it if they come in and say, well, don't put that in or whatever. I mean, the bank is mentioned because the first bank was historic, was older, and the picture on the front cover of the book is a drawing of the building that was where the Bankwest Corporation, which was the holding company for First National Bank. That's where they were headquartered. That's the reason it's on there. But minor point. So Senator Domenici came to the book signing, and where Concha had her big nose, right, and had a nice chat. And then later I thought, I think I wrote his office, said, may I mail this? And I'm sure he remembered the party. And I said, can I send this and autograph it? Which he did. So I have it with his autograph on it. He's since passed away, of course. And I know his daughter's on in politics now, too. So it was a pleasure meeting him now. So it was a big party. I was telling that bourbon story about Amalia when she walked in the door. She was a few minutes late. I didn't mention her name. I wouldn't have done that. Now I can say that, right? And but she walked in, and later she told me, she said, oh, God, no. And I said, Molly, I said, I left your name. I didn't, nobody could guess who it was, right? I just told the story, and everybody had a little laugh about it, and we went on. That was it, right? Does anybody have any comments or questions? I do have copies of the book available. I have one Taos book left from going up to Taos, and I have the poster available, and Judy and Ann are going to help with those sales, and I'd be happy to autograph. Or if you brought someone, or came to me, if you bought a copy of my book, I'd be very happy to sign that as well. So I do remember watching Johnny Carson. I had to sign 2,500 of those plates. Now they wisely had me sign them before they numbered them in case I messed them up. So I would, and they had a peel off back, and they stuck them in the inside front cover with the, what do you call those pages that were first over the book. Anyway, so I sign it, throw it up in the air so the ink would dry. And so I do about 300 a night watching Johnny. And then I take them down, drive them down on my bicycle, whatever, down to the bank, give them 300 at a time or so, and they start numbering them, putting them in until they get up to the 2,500. So I have those books available, but I also have the exact same book, except there's no plate in it because they had a slight overrun, and I got those books from them. So those books are unused. The other books are in good condition, but they're had previous owners because they're unnumbered. So they're available.
Thank you, John.
Thank you so much for arranging this to become real.
When are you coming back to Santa Fe?
I don't know, but every time I come, I say, I've got to come more often. I really got to come more often. I said though, some years ago, if I moved here, I'd have to come with a very large bag of money.
Nowadays.
Because real estate in Indianapolis compared to here is so cheap. So if I sold my house, I said, it's not Santa Fe style, but if I cut it in 4 pieces, put it on a train, shipped out here, put it on East Palace down somewhere, I could get $4 million for it, right? I mean, really, it's 3 stories above ground. But and if I spend $500,000 getting out here, I'd still make a nice profit. But I don't think I'll do that. I think it would fit in, even though it's not quite the same thing. Thank you. Thank you very much. appreciate it.
Thank you, John.
We'll set up the books on the side. That is the
Yeah, I wanted to meet you. My name is Tom Moore. Just met him for 10 years, John Smallwood. I've known him for a long time. He got in an accident from the Scottish Rite. Called me up. There's a lady and told someone else to the police. So he wondered if we had cameras at the intersection. I found it. I work for this. So I had the footage. I'm your biggest fan. He was very happy.
The beginning of
I hope